The International Weightlifting Federation Executive Board has controversially voted to oust acting president Ursula Papandrea. In her place, they have voted in Thailand's Intarat Yodbangtoey. Now, this decision comes amidst a battle of the future direction that the IWF is going to follow after all of the alleged corruption that led to the resignation of the long-acting president, Tamas Ayan. Now, I'm not going to go into everything that led up until this moment. I've been through it so many times. There are articles, there are videos, there are podcasts covering absolutely everything on this topic. In fact, if you go to weightliftinghouse.com, right on the top, there should be something that says something along the lines of IWF corruption. If you click that, there's a full timeline. There's also a full article on this very thing, which you'll be able to find right at the top of the weightliftinghouse.com website. So you can check all of that out there. Again, before I go into everything, I think it's worth expressing the gravity of this situation. We are in relatively unprecedented times. Weightlifting has always had this tumultuous relationship, I suppose, with the IOC. Ups and downs. We've been threatened to leave. We've been, one of the favorites as a competition or as a sport, I suppose, mainly because of our longevity in the Olympics. But we find ourselves at this moment at a real crossroads where things seem to have been improving from real depths of our sport, where things got about as bad as they could within the last year. We seem to be taking a downhill turn once again, a trough out of which I'm not sure we'll truly really ever be able to recover, but hopefully we will. Enough of that stuff, let's get into the actual facts. Ursula Papandrea from the USA, the acting interim president for the IWF, was apparently removed from her position due to an emergency executive board meeting called by Nicu Vlad from Romania. And this board meeting was held remotely. For those of you who don't know, Nicu Vlad is one of the greatest weightlifters of all time. He snatched 200.5 kilos in the 100 kilo bodyweight class. He is, in fact, the heaviest weightlifter ever to snatch over double bodyweight in competition. As well as deciding to remove Ursula Papandrea, the acting president, the board has also decided to move someone else from the USA. The head weightlifting, USA CEO, Phil Andrews, who of course we've had on the podcast many times. And they've decided to remove him from his position as the acting IWF Interim Deputy Director General. One of the interesting things about this is the fact that Ursula Papandrea was not actually involved in this meeting, so it's unclear how many executive board members were present. We'll go into whether this will therefore be a legitimate vote a little bit later. So why has this all happened in the first place? Well, the last few days we've seen some bitter disagreements at the top of the IWF, some of which have spilt out into the public. You'll have seen these on Instagram, you'll have seen these on Reddit Weightlifting. They've kind of spilt out into the weightlifting sphere. And there have been claims that certain people are proposing to scrap the current Olympic qualification process and replace it with a relatively simple rankings list that's, to some extent, I guess, aimed at benefiting certain countries. In particular, of course, there are countries that will benefit specifically from these. In fact, countries that are currently really restricted from the Olympic participation due to either being entirely suspended because of doping violations or because they have been accused of attempting to avoid the punishments that they've been given. Countries that would fall into this list would be Thailand, would be Romania, and you could see other countries who don't necessarily fall into this list in terms of doping side of things, but just in terms of benefiting from a restructured change to the qualification system would be a country like Iran with regards to Sarab Moradi or Kianush Rustami. If you want to see a full list of the current executive board, the people who are involved in this decision, as well as the presidents from the continental federations, there is a full list of these people on the Weightlifting House website, on the article, the most recent one that's all about this, and you can go through, you can see who Ursula Papandrea was, you can see who the new Intarat Yodbangtoey is, you can see the roles that guys like Nicu Vlad have played, or Pyrrhus Dimas, or we've got literally everyone there. So if you want to see who is involved in this and then research a little bit more about each person, that's probably the best place to do it. So many of you will know at this point who Ursula Papandrea is. She's been involved in USA weightlifting for a long time, and she's been involved at the highest levels of the IWF for some time also. She first became the acting IWF president when Tamas Ayan voluntarily stepped aside in January earlier this year in 2020 as allegations of corruption that were made by this German documentary were investigated. She continued in the role after his resignation in April and has been fulfilling that role right up until now. To some extent, I think Ursula has been seen by many, myself included, as almost like a beacon of hope. She seems like the sort of person who's willing to do anything within her power to actively clean up the sport, to help it turn a corner and to ultimately allow it to continue on forever as an Olympic sport. She has been widely seen as this force of change that's been needed for the IWF, pushing for wide reforms to the governance, to anti-doping and athlete involvement. Her removal is kind of seen by everybody involved in weightlifting, at least from countries that I'm familiar with, as a, I suppose, resistance to the changes that she wants to assert on the federation. So Ursula has been removed, and in her place is now Intarat Yodbangtoey. Now, who is this guy? Well, most of you won't have ever heard of this guy. Some of you might have done if you're a real weightlifting nerd, or perhaps if you've read the full McLaren report, because this person's name is mentioned there, not for good reasons. The replacement selected by the executive board is sure to raise some eyebrows here. So Yodbangtoey is specifically mentioned in the McLaren report into IWF corruption, and this is a quote from the report. The vote broker distributing the $5,000 cash bribe from a bag in his possession in 2017 was said to be Major General Intarat Yodbangtoey, the first vice president of the IWF. That's on page 87 of the report. You can find the report at weightliftinghouse.com. Now, this is basically saying that he was one of the guys who, right below Tamas Ayan, was literally handing real bags of cash up to the value of $5,000 as bribe money to continue for the, I guess, voting and continuation of the president Tamas Ayan. Not only that, but of course he was the honorary president of the Thailand Weightlifting Federation during a period of time that featured multiple doping scandals and essentially ended with the entire Thailand Weightlifting Federation board all resigning. Not only that, of course, Thailand is one of the countries that's currently seeking to overturn a punishment for anti-doping violations. They aren't allowed to compete in the Olympics. They weren't allowed to compete at their own world championships. They are about as dirty a country as could be. And now they have been voted in by the executive IWF board as the leaders, as the head of change going forward. So this is ridiculous. As you can expect, there have been some strong reactions. Not only have we recorded this video, we try to keep it relatively impartial and just objective, giving out the facts. We will be doing a podcast, myself and Dan, the People's Editor, who helps with everything at Weightlifting House. We'll be doing a podcast soon talking about our actual feelings, not representing Weightlifting House, just representing ourselves. So if you want to check that out, we'll be recording that tomorrow. But we've also seen some statements issued by other serious major players. So USA Weightlifting, in fact, released a really strongly worded statement on Instagram, and it begins by saying, "Today is a dark day for weightlifting." And then it goes on to condemn the actions of the executive boards. Now, I'm going to read out some of the few things that they do mention in this, just because it's interesting. If you want to go and read the whole thing, we'll link it down below, or maybe it's even on the screen right now. But here are a few of the quotes. "These transparently corrupt actions serve only one purpose: rewarding and empowering nations who can only win by cheating." It also finishes with a bit of a call to action for those reading. It says, "We call on other like-minded nations to vocalize their desires for complete reform at the IWF. We need to protect first and foremost the clean athletes." Now, literally, as I'm recording this, more information is coming in, and I just received another message from Dan, the People's Editor, who is just explaining that a new quote has come in from the IOC on this situation. And here is the International Olympic Committee's quote. "The IOC is very worried to learn about the reported decision made by the board of the International Weightlifting Federations to replace the acting president, Ms. Ursula Papandrea. the way that the decision was taken, and the chosen replacement. So as we can see, even the IOC, the people who've been pressuring the IWF, the Weightlifting Federation, to make these changes, to steer towards a cleaner sport, they are now concerned. They've already been threatening the sport with accusations that if we don't reform, we'll be out of the Olympics. The oldest sport, the Olympics, out for good. And now we go and make one of these changes, this crazy change, and they're even more concerned, which doesn't look good for the future. Now, there are lots of people who've been allocated by name in this sort of stuff. There are perhaps reasons why certain members of the executive board might have voted in certain directions. All of that stuff we're going to talk about on the podcast. I'm not going to go into that now. I'm just going to continue on, just giving out the facts as we currently know them, with as little subjectiveness as possible. So the final response, probably worth mentioning, is from Sarah Davies from Great Britain, who is now the chair of the new IWF Athletes Commission. And she released a video statement on Instagram in which she says the following: "The IWF is corrupt and needs change." She also claims that there was a resistance in the executive board as to the creation of this Athletes Commission, and specifically to her being appointed as the chair. She mentions that when she had the opportunity to observe an executive board meeting, Ursula Papandrea was treated in an entirely disrespectful manner by the other members. So, what happens now? Well, there have been some questions raised about whether this meeting, which was used to oust Ursula Papandrea, was actually a valid board meeting. So we may see some development of that over the coming days. Again, the reason to that was because we're not sure entirely that every single person who's on that executive board was there. And of course, as I mentioned, the most concerning potential result of this huge upheaval at the IWF is basically going to come down to the increased threat to the Olympic status of weightlifting. It is the Olympic status that has always made weightlifting the world's strength sport. There's a reason it's not powerlifting. There's a reason that it's not strongman. Weightlifting is in the Olympics. It is the official strength sport of the world, and we kind of need to do everything we can to hold on to that in order to maintain funding, in order to maintain the best weightlifters from other countries in the world who only give funding to Olympic sports to continue training, so that as a global sport we actually have the highest levels of competition possible. As I'm sure you basically all know at this point, the International Olympic Committee was already voicing doubts as to whether weightlifting could maintain its presence at the Olympic Games. And in fact, just a few days ago, and I mean really just a few days ago before this all came out of the IWF, the IOC president Thomas Bach had some incredibly stern words for the sport. His words here: "With regard to governance, we have strong concerns. We have strong concerns about the lack of progress with regards to the reforms of the IWF constitution and about the lack of acceptance of independent advice in this procedure. Another point of concern with regards to governance was the representation of athletes within the IWF, which definitely needs to be strengthened. We will communicate these concerns to the IWF, and we will advise them at the same time that we are currently reviewing the event program and the quota places for the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. We will also advise them that we reserve the right, if need be, to take further measures, which are including but not limited to a review of the place of weightlifting on the program of Paris 2024. This is a not so subtle threat explanation that weightlifting isn't guaranteed a spot. Just because it's been around in the sport or in the Olympics for so long does not mean that we are exempt from a review and a subsequent removal from the games. The latest changes at the top of the IWF seem highly unlikely to increase the IOC's confidence in the sport. The IOC Executive Board will meet in December, and they're going to decide quotas for Paris 2024. If the political fight at the IWF hurts weightlifting's chance of inclusion, that might be when we'll find out. A new IWF Executive Board is due to be elected in March of 2021, and so at that point we'll probably begin to see where the new balance of power in weightlifting really does lie. I'm going to post links to every single article that goes through all of this, as well as our summary article at weightliftinghouse.com. If you want to go into more detail on everything, I'd highly recommend checking insidethegames.biz, I believe it is, for the weightlifting news. And then if you want to listen to what will probably be a good hour or so of myself and Dan actually voicing our own opinions on this, rather than having to just report the facts, then head over to the Weightlifting House podcast, where we will give a full voiced rundown of everything that we know, the entire build-up, our thoughts on this, and a possible future for weightlifting. I hope I haven't come across as being too solemn on this this impromptu episode of the Weightlifting House YouTube channel. I think sometimes solemnity is actually needed when the gravity of a situation is severe enough, but I hope I haven't upset people too much with this statement. However, I think it genuinely is important that everybody understands just how precarious weightlifting is as an Olympic sport right now. If you want to know what to do, I mean, you can send letters to the IWF Federation. There are links to those email addresses on Reddit that you can find on the main thread about all of this. I'll put those on the screen for you actually, so that you can check them out too. And also worth getting in touch with your own federation, just speaking to them, asking what it is that you can do to help, and seeing if you can anyway add to the manpower that might be needed to help reverse this decision and be included in the reform. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Weightlifting House news show. The proper news show will be coming out tomorrow, and keep training hard.